Hello, we see you, we hear you, you hear us. Can you say something?
Yes, I hear you very
okay?
well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
So, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, can we kick off? I'm asking our IT people. Wonderful. Good morning, dear colleagues. I would like to welcome all of you, the AFET members here in Brussels this morning and in front of your screens across the continent. I hope you've all had a good summer break. Let me also welcome the large number of interested people following us on the web stream for this extraordinary committee meeting. Our meeting will be broadcasted on the Europe by Satellite service, and many EU media outlets will be streaming this meeting live. So also a warm welcome to all of you. Item number 1, the adoption of the agenda. If there are no objections, I propose to adopt the agenda. Item number 2, the announcements from my side. I can be brief. Let me once again inform you that our meeting, as usual, is being web streamed. Today we have interpretation available in 6 languages: English, French, German, Spanish, Italian and Polish. And may I once again remind you that the interpreters rely on the quality of the sound and video of remote participants in order to get your message across. Please be aware that phone interventions and audio-only connections, unfortunately, will not be interpreted. Item number 3, the reason for today's meeting, the situation in Belarus. Colleagues, we are resuming our business earlier than anticipated due to the extraordinary events taking place in Belarus. As you know, the presidential elections took place on the 9th of August. During the electoral campaign, the people of Belarus have demonstrated their desire for democratic change. The authorities responded with repression and arrests of potential candidates and political activists, many of whom remain in prison. Observers from OSCE, ODIHR, were not invited to observe the elections, but credible reports of domestic observers clearly show that the electoral process didn't meet the international standards expected of an OSCE participating state. The announcement of manipulated results sparked the biggest protests that the country has seen since its independence. Peaceful demonstrations were met with extreme brutality, which deeply shocked the Belarusians. Reports indicate that at least 3 protesters were killed and those arrested were subject to beatings, torture and intimidation. Yet, as we have observed, the crackdown only strengthened the resolve of the people, as seen again last weekend. They took to the streets in even bigger numbers, and the workers of the largest state enterprises announced nationwide strikes. The opposition has formed a coordination council which is coordinating a peaceful and orderly transfer of power from the incumbent president. However, President Lukashenko has accused the council of trying to seize power, and 2 members of its presidium were detained yesterday. Colleagues, we will have a very comprehensive discussion today. First, we will hear from the European External Action Service about the EU's response to the events in Belarus, and we will discuss our next steps. I would like to welcome per video Ms. Helga Schmidt, the Secretary General of the European External Action Service, replacing the High Representative and Vice President Josep Borrell, who unfortunately can't be with us today. Then, after the debate with Helga Schmidt, we will have an opportunity to hear a Belarusian perspective directly from Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, the main opposition candidate in the presidential election. Colleagues, the events in Belarus have prompted a quick response from the European Union at the highest level. The High Representative, Josep Borrell, convened a video conference meeting with the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the 27 member states on the 14th of August. This was followed up by the video conference of the European Council, as you recall, on the 19th of August. There has also been a strong reaction from the European Parliament. President David Sassoli made a statement during the emergency summit of the European Council, and the leaders of 5 political groups, the EPP, the SND, Renew Europe, the Greens, EFA and the ECR, made a joint statement on the 17th of August. Together with our committee vice chair, Witold Waszczykowski, I also made a statement immediately after the elections. Our message was and is clear. We do not recognise the election results. We condemn the brutality by the security forces, and we support the demands of the Belarusian people for a new and free elections to be held under the supervision of independent observers such as the OSCE. And finally, I would also like to remind all of you that 2 of our members, Robert Biedron and Petras Austrevicius, who intended to travel to Minsk upon the invitation of civil society activists, were prevented from entering the territory of Belarus. That's all from my side. Let me now turn to Helga Schmid. She is perfectly placed to report about the outcome of the discussions at member state level and the next steps that the European Union is planning to take regarding Belarus. Helga, once again, a warm welcome, and I will give you the floor for about 7 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and let me thank the Chair for inviting me to this exchange of views on Belarus. We have been very closely following the developments over the past month, and of course particularly during the last weeks. You have seen that the High Representative called for an informal video conference of the foreign ministers who discussed Belarus. The leaders had a discussion on the 19th of August. There have been many contacts. Our head of delegation in Minsk has been very active, and for good reason, because Belarus is a close neighbor, and what happens there obviously matters to us. We have also taken good note of the statement by the political groups of the European Parliament of the 17th of August. Now, what we have witnessed was a massive crackdown by the Belarusian authorities around these elections. This is not new. We have seen this in previous elections, but this time the tactic of violent suppression of protests that were employed before have not produced the results the authorities had hoped for. And what we have seen is very impressive peaceful demonstrations by the people of Belarus that very much reflect their democratic aspirations. Unfortunately, these demonstrations were met by widespread brutality by the law enforcement authorities. The chairman referred to the cases of ill treatment, torture, which in our view have rather solidified the unprecedented mobilization of the Belarusian society, including in some cases state-owned enterprises, state media, cultural and social institutions. And the protests we have seen are clearly in response to the falsification of election results. People were no longer ready to accept that their votes were disregarded. And there is one very clear demand of the people, and this is for new, free and fair democratic elections. Now, what is extremely important is to emphasize that this mobilization of the Belarusian people is about their right to freely and democratically choose their leaders and to be able to decide the future for themselves. I'm saying that because this is not about a binary choice between the West or Russia. There are no EU flags flying at the demonstrations. I think we must take this into account when we are considering what the EU can do. So what have we done and what more can we do? And the meeting of foreign affairs ministers and at the European Council this month have clearly set out our position. You will have seen the press statements. So maybe let me just make a couple of points here. First, our strong condemnation when it comes to violence against peaceful protesters and inhumane treatment of detainees. We have called for, and we continue to call for, the release of the remaining unlawfully detained protesters, as well as all those who were imprisoned on political grounds. Those responsible for these crimes should face trial, and also the European Council was very clear in their demand for a complete and transparent investigation. Secondly, the External Action Service has already been tasked to prepare EU sanctions when it comes in relation to those responsible for violence, repression, but also falsification of the election results. This is being prepared, and we will discuss this with the foreign ministers later this week when we will have the informal Gimlich meeting in Berlin. But the idea is, of course, to take a decision on this very, very soon. We very much support Belarus' independence and sovereignty. We are against any external interference. I think this is also very important in light of different claims that have been made. But this is also why we think that there is no alternative to an inclusive national dialogue for a democratic and peaceful solution to the situation, but also to avoid any further violence. And in this regard, we have called on the Belarusian authorities to stop the criminal case initiated against the newly created Coordination Council and release the detained members of this council. Also this week, and I should mention that, there will be an extraordinary OSCE meeting to discuss the OSCE's role in supporting Belarus. We welcome the proposal by the chairmanship in office for a joint visit with the future chairmanship in office to Minsk. And for the EU, and the High Representative has been very clear about this from the beginning, we are absolutely available to contribute to any of these efforts and any effort for democratic and a peaceful solution. The High Representative has been declared his own readiness to go and visit, and but for the time being, the focus is on the proposal by the OSCE, which we stand ready to support. Both the President of the European Council and the High Representative have been very active in urging all to avoid external interference. They have urged the Belarusian authorities to enter into the national dialogue. President Michel has spoken to President Putin. The High Representative has spoken both to Foreign Minister Lavrov, but also to the Belarusian Foreign Minister. And as the European Union, we strongly support Belarus' independent sovereignty and the democratic choice of the Belarusian people, as well as their fundamental rights and freedoms. And we trust that Russia does so too. I should also stress the very important role the EU delegation in Minsk has played, and particularly also its head, Dirk Schübel, particularly in the past weeks, in maintaining, not only ensuring EU coordination on the ground, but also maintaining regular contacts with all actors in Belarus, including notably civil society and opposition, effectively ensuring a unified EU position on the ground, and working with other key partners. This has been also one of the outcomes of the European Council for the EU to work with third countries, and we have had contacts at all levels. And this will remain crucial also in the days, weeks and months ahead. So you can rest assured that we will remain very vigilant of the increased risk also of disinformation in this particular sensitive time. And finally, and this brings me to the end, and to pick up also one of the points in the political group statement of the 17th of August, after the Gimlich, we'll be conducting a wider review of EU-Belarus relations. We will keep firmly at the forefront of our review that relations with our 6 Eastern partners, including Belarus, through the Eastern Partnership, are based on a joint commitment to principles of international law, fundamental values, including democracy, and of course rule of law and respect for human rights. So how to support the Belarusian people and civil society will be a key part of this review. But let me just also mention that, and you have seen that in the press conference following the European Council, the President of the Commission already announced that the Commission has mobilized 53 million to support the Belarusian people, 2 million to support the victims of violence, 1 million for civil society, independent media, and 50 million for coronavirus support, in particular to support vulnerable groups, social services, which is, of course, emergency assistance to health and social services in what is a very extreme situation for the Belarusian people. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak here, and with that, I give back the floor.
Thank you, Secretary General Schmidt, for your introductory remarks. We now come to the exchange of views. We have decided that the representatives of the groups will each get the floor for 2 minutes, and then we will have a round with Helga Schmidt to sum up before then coming to the next part of today's meeting. So 2 minutes each, and the first speaker for the EPP is Sandra Kalniete per remote. Sandra. Obviously, we have some technical difficulties connecting Sandra Kalniete. Sandra, if you can hear me now, we will give you the floor as soon as possible. So let's move on to the next speaker for the S&D group, Tonino Pizzula.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. We have all been following the news from the Belarus with concern in the past months and with horror in the past weeks. A regime and its authoritarian leader Lukashenko, which have been in place since the end of the last century, not only massively falsified the results of the recent presidential elections, but also used violence, torture and repression against the people. It has become inevitable for the EU to move from critical engagement to critical reassessment and response. We have already been calling for targeted EU sanctions against those responsible for the falsification of election results, violence against peaceful protesters and the large-scale repression. Implementation of these sanctions must be effective as soon as possible. We should also reassess all EU engagement with Belarus. Nevertheless, we should be careful enough to avoid any negative impact on the population. People have already suffered much during the past months, in particular as a consequence of the regime's denial of the COVID-19 pandemic. We should not regret that a visa facilitation agreement with Belarus entered into force on the 1st of July. Through the ongoing pandemic has, of course, limited its impact. This agreement is a clear sign to Belarusian citizens that the EU stands with them. As EU, we must maintain a strong and principled position in support of fundamental freedoms and human rights, offer fast and effective support for Belarusian civil society and support the process of national dialogue. Finally, it's important that High Representative Borrell also explained this European Union position in a phone call with the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs Lavrov last Friday. Given that Lukashenko has threatened his fellow citizens with a call for Russian military support in suppressing their legitimate discontent, it must be very clear that we expect Russia to abstain from igniting further violence or repression. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tonino Pizzula.
And now I will try again to connect Sandra Kalniete.
Mrs. Kalniete, could you please press the speak button? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I apologize for the first mistake what I made. Dear President, dear Helga Schmidt, of course there is no doubt that 9th August is a turning point in the history of Belarus, when the majority of Belarusian voters said no to Lukashenko's dictatorship by voting for Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya. The international community has also said that the presidential elections were not free and fair, and Lukashenko is not considered re-elected president by all member states of the European Union and democratic world, in Belarus, a democratic, non-violent revolution is taking place, which Lukashenko is trying to suppress in the most brutal way. In fact, the true elected president is Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, who has taken on the responsibility and the role of the leader of this democratic revolution of the Belarusian nation. The coordinating council, composed of representatives of the people, has been mandated by the people to enter into a dialogue with representatives of Belarusian government on the transition of power that should end with the new presidential elections. It is therefore completely unacceptable that the members of Coordination Council have been accused of attempting a coup d'etat and have been prosecuted, interrogated, detained. We demand the release of those who are detained from Coordination Council. The situation in Belarus is extremely serious. We must not give in to the illusion that the brutal violence of the first days is over. It continues, but in more hidden forms. Instead of entering into dialogue with Coordination Council, Lukashenko continues to strengthen his repressive machine with Kalashnikov in his hands. The army is launched in the streets. Unknown heroes receive awards and praise. He has ordered the arrest of organizers of mass movements and strikes, the closure of a striking enterprise, and the dismissal of teachers taking part in protests. The number and fate of the missing people is unknown. The European Parliament and European Council must therefore continue to press strongly. May I put at the end the only question what I would like to get the response from Helga Schmidt. There was agreement with the European Commission to disburse the allocated EU money for fight with COVID to Belarus after the elections. European People's Party considers that it should not be directed to Ministry of the Health as it was done with the first tranche. And we suggest that it is withheld and directed to support the civil society and NGO. I would like to know what Commission intends to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra Kalniete. And now for the Renew Europe Group, Hilde Woutmans, who is with us here in Brussels. Please.
Oh, I have to put my mic on. Dear Mrs. Smith, dear Chair and colleagues, what we fear became reality on August 9th. Lukashenko claimed victory over elections that were neither free nor fair. And we have all seen the horrifying images of the brutal repression, violence and arbitrary detentions that followed, when the people of Belarus took the streets and asked for democratic change. The unfortunate events in Belarus once again show that the EU needs an EU Magnitsky Act to sanction all those involved in violent repression and human rights abuses. The events once again underlined that EU support should always be carefully monitored so that no EU funds go to authoritarian regimes that not shy away from bloody repression. The events also emphasized that we will need to continue to speak with Russia to avoid that an internal conflict will turn into a conflict EU-Russia. That is why I really welcome the prompt decision of EU foreign ministers and EU leaders to sanction those responsible for the violence and repression and redirect EU funds to the people of Belarus. I also welcome their talks with Russia. As the heart of European democracy, we should therefore express our solidarity with the people of Belarus. Our message, Mr. Chair, is very clear. We will stand with the people of Belarus for as long as it takes. But our actions should not stop there. It's evident that no one but the people of Belarus will determine the future of their country. However, if we are serious about not giving up on the people of Belarus, we need to have a strategy in case the situation does not change. And it is for me very clear that such a strategy will also have to include further talks with Russia. That is why, Mrs. Smith, I would like to hear more from you about any such strategy and whether discussions with Russia are ongoing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hilde Woutmans. The next speaker for the ID group is our colleague Thierry Mariani. The floor is yours.
Monsieur le Président, merci.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I think we all share the same goal, which is ensuring that all prisoners are freed and that calm is restored. We want dialogue to be restored to the country. Let me make three brief comments. Firstly, I hear people talking about sanctions. I would say why not, but they've never actually been useful at all. I mean, who seriously believes in this room that having travel bans or asset confiscations for assets abroad will change the situation? But, well, to those who are saying let's do it, well, I'd say why not, but it doesn't really seem the appropriate way to act. Secondly, national dialogue. Now, I note that this time Europe is being much more prudent than in previous crises. I'm thinking particularly of the Ukraine crisis, and I think we're on the right path here. I don't think that none of us have forgotten that some of the agreements relating to Ukraine, which were taken under the guidance of large European states, only lasted for just a few hours. I think we all agree that we need dialogue with Russia here, as the previous speaker said. Mrs. Schmidt isn't the right body to be involved in this, the OSCE, because this is an organisation that includes Russia and the European Union, and that would mean that dialogue was more likely to be successful. And then a final question. We're going to be helping Belarus financially. That's a good thing. But my question is a simple one. Who are we going to be providing the funding to? Because I hear we're fighting COVID there, and that's a good thing. But nevertheless, I do want to know where the money is actually going to go and how we're going to ensure that it achieves its objectives. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Mariani. Next for the Greens EFA group, Reinhard Bütikofer, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mrs. Schmidt, for your presentation. I would like to start by praising the HRVP and the Council for the firm and measured position they have taken. I fully agree with your bottom line, no foreign interference from either side. It would be very dangerous to inject additional geopolitical tensions into this fight of the Belarusian people for their for respect and respect in particular for their own democratic choice. I guess it would be helpful if the EU could coordinate by all our efforts by identifying a special envoy, that experienced special envoy to deal with the situation. We will all, as we have said, continue with our solidarity with the people of Belarus. But the most important issue, of course, is how we can help them in achieving the goal of a dialogue with the system. And in this regard, I also want to ask regarding the role of OSCE. Is it possible to induce Russia to convince Lukashenko to accept an OSCE effort in Belarus with the aim of possibly finding an Armenian solution? Also, I think it's good that we're helping them and that we should emphasize the promise of a strong Eastern partnership from our side for all the people, not just the opposition. but we also have to prepare for the eventuality of a violent crackdown. And in that regard, I think while we praise Lithuania for hosting the opposition leader Tsikhanouskaya, we should also make sure that in case of need, the EU will be prepared to offer refuge to people that might need that. And in ending, I would like to echo what has been said before about the global human rights sanctions mechanism that should urgently be finalized under the present German presidency. Thank you.
Thank you, Reinhard Bütikofer. For the ECR group, I give the floor to Jacek Saryusz-Wolski, please.
Thank you so much, Chairman, and dear colleagues. We can welcome the reaction of the European Council and the 5 groups of the Parliament at the first stage of events happening in Belarus. But what was adequate a week ago in the first stage is not adequate any longer in the second stage where we are. European Council, and we fully endorse, did not recognize the elections, called for the new ones, established sanctions which are not very effective, as we know, made the general condemnation of violence and called to punish those responsible for violence. But Council was silent on Russia, just mentioning no external interference, coded. So omitted the elephant in the room, which is Russia. Our 5 groups leaders went further, and thank you for that, on that point, calling Russia to refrain from intervention and EU to counteract such interference of Russia by name, mentioning Russia by name. Belarusian society and citizens will achieve freedom and democracy on their own, if not hindered from the outside. Regime without Russian support will not sustain. What is needed now is no longer words, but action. In the second stage, when Russia not yet militarily intervenes, but already in hybrid way intervenes, and this intervention is happening in front of our eyes. Structures of Belarusian state are being taken over by Russia, like state TV, special forces, secret service operatives, and military advisors. This is lower cost for Russia than direct military intervention. We should act in order to put higher the cost for Russia for further interference. One should punish not the hand, not the sword, but the hand, and neutralize the interference. What is needed, my last sentence, heavy sanctions on Russia for this interference in Belarus just now, like, for example, excluding from the SWIFT financial system. Best would be for EU and USA to act together and quick, because time counts. Thank you.
Thank you, dear colleague. For the GUI NGL group, I give the floor to Manu Pineda.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Belarus is part of the Eastern Partnership of the European Union. And this partnership it acts as a bridge between the EU and Russia, but we seem to have decided that it's not going to be like this. Any kind of potential actor that might facilitate dialogue and a peaceful pathway out has been excluded. There's no way for them to recognize now. There's no recognition of the elections. There's no proof whatsoever. The External Action Services is talking about violence, about abuse. We're just talking about that, but there's not a basis for sanctions. Now we talk about protesters who've died. Well, the first protester was caught preparing a violent act. So, I mean, it wasn't really about peaceful protest in this case. So we can't have external policy run by White House diktats and instructions. What we should have is a coherent policy. If we say the EU promotes multilateralism and we are opposed to interference, then we need to be consistent. We cannot be seen to be interfering either. So let's make a contribution either to peace, to multilateralism, to human progress, and the rights of individual peoples and their sovereignty, and we must respect their sovereignty. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, for the non-inscrit, I give the floor to Kostas Papadakis.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. With this opportunity, I would like to denounce that the events in Belarus are directly linked with the intervention of the European Union, NATO, and the United States of America in the country. The pretext of the EU and its allies comprise a well-known and repeated play that has been used in Syria, Libya, Ukraine, Iraq, among others. The peoples have paid in their own blood for your interventions and are still being tormented by wars, poverty and refugee waves in and out of their countries. All these are the result of the competition of monopoly groups for the control of the markets, as in Belarus for the control of the energy routes, in a country where Russia has strong footholds and Belarus is being considered as the last stop on China's Silk Road. To the governments of Poland and the Baltic countries, which invoke the arguments of freedom and democracy, we could say, look who's talking. While arguing about the situation in Belarus, they put on trial newspapers of the opposition, sent communists to prison, banned communist parties, while they whitewash the fascist gangs. The people of Belarus have not given to EU any kind of authorization to intervene. They do not need EU. The people can decide based on their own interests to turn the page, relieving themselves of the current and of any bourgeois regime, building their own power, charting an alternative to the dead ends of the capitalist way of development. Thank you.
Thank you, dear colleagues. So this was the first round of the group speakers. I will now give the floor back to Helga Schmidt to react to the questions and the comments for roughly 8 or 9 minutes, and then we move on. Helga Schmidt, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for all the comments, which have been very helpful also for us, also in view of the upcoming discussions in Gimnich. Let me just recall that for the European Union, we are very clear when it comes to our solidarity with the people of Belarus, and also we stand ready to accompany the peaceful democratic transition of power in Belarus. This does not mean any interference, outside interference. I've been very clear that we respect Belarus' independence and sovereignty, and that the future of Belarus made by the Belarusian people in Belarus. It must grow from within. Let me now come to the questions that were raised, starting with Mr. Pizzula. I agree, I think, with you. We have to move to critical reassessment, and this is also, let me be very clear, because you raised it, when it comes to the sanctions we are preparing. First of all, the work is done and can be done within the existing sanctions framework, but it's also clear that any listings we are preparing have to be targeted. That means, and you mentioned that, we absolutely have to make sure that there are no negative consequences, of course, on the population. This is really targeted against those responsible for repression and responsible for fraud. Now, I know, and I think Mr. Mariani mentioned it, sanctions are not an end in themselves. Sanctions are meant to produce a change of behavior, and it's for sure not the only thing we're doing, but I think it's very important, and that's been also the clear result of both the informal foreign ministers meeting and the European Council. And also, as Mr. Pizzola was referring to, we are preparing a review of our relations. Then on the Coordination Council, and Ms. Cagnette referred to it, also there we have been very clear against and also out there in the public domain when it comes to any persecution of the members of the Council. We have had contacts with them. We've been calling upon the Belarusian authorities to offer safe space for national dialogue as the only way forward. On the corona support, just to be very clear, this is emergency assistance for health and social services, because the people of Belarus are particularly affected, also because of the handling of the crisis when it comes to the authorities. Of course, this is not meant as budget support. The modalities of disbursement are still under consideration. We have to make sure that the people benefit. It's also important, this is what I mentioned earlier on, that we benefit particularly the people who have become victims of violence, civil society. And let me also say that all COVID support to date provided has gone through the WHO equipment that has been delivered, and civil society, again to benefit vulnerable groups of the Belarusian people. But again, the concrete modalities of disbursement of the 50 million that were announced are under consideration and have to be adjusted also in line with the developments. Now, on the question of Russia, I agree that the discussion with Russia is absolutely important. This is why we have had several contacts at the level of the President of the European Council, who spoke with President Putin on the 18th of August, who stressed the importance of a national dialogue in Belarus, the need to avoid any negative external interference. Since then, we have seen statements from the Kremlin denying any intention of Russian military intervention in Belarus. We will, of course, remain very vigilant to the situation in Belarus and will closely continue to monitor the situation, also the reactions of the international community over the next days and weeks. But I would also agree, I think, with the statement that the OSCE is very well placed to step in immediately, because both Belarus and Russia are members of the OSCE. And there will be the session on Friday in Vienna. Mr. Mariani mentioned the issue of sanctions. I've already replied to, and the OSCE. Mr. Bütikofer rightly referred to the risk of geopolitical tensions on the issue of appointing a special envoy. I think at this point the focus has very much been at the engagement at the highest level. The High Representative himself, some of the national leaders, including the President of the European Council, who have been reaching out. Also the President of the European Council was trying to talk to Lukashenko, which was not possible. So we will also see how things will develop in the next weeks. But let me reassure you that we will remain engaged at all levels. I will, for example, go myself to attend the extraordinary session of the Permanent Council of the OSCE on Friday in Vienna, also to represent the European Union there. Then Mr. Sarasvolsky, I think I agree with what you said on the issue of hybrid threat, disinformation. I mentioned the issue of disinformation myself. I think we are particularly vigilant when it comes to that, and working on it. And I think that is. I hope I haven't forgotten anyone, but this is at least the questions I have noted. And thanks again for giving me the opportunity to participate in this important debate today.
Okay, thank you, Secretary General, for your closing remarks. I think you covered many questions which colleagues had been asking. If there are no further comments from your side at this stage, I would now move on to the second part of our discussion. I'm especially pleased to welcome to our meeting Ms. Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, the United Opposition candidate who is widely regarded as the candidate who got the majority of votes in the presidential elections. Ms. Tsikhanouskaya, you experienced firsthand the repressions taking place in Belarus. You are joining us from Vilnius in Lithuania as you have been forced to leave your country after the elections. Your husband, Sergei Tikhanovsky, remains in prison since May. Ms. Tsikhanouskaya, you deserve the greatest respect for the courage that you showed during the election campaign and after it, despite a high personal cost. You inspired Belarusians to believe in democratic change and to demand that their voices are heard and that their votes are honestly counted. So, colleagues, this is a unique opportunity for us to hear the views on the current situation in Belarus and the way forward. Ms. Tikhanovskaya, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Honourable members of the European Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, today my country, Belarus, is in turmoil and crisis. Peaceful protesters are being illegally detained, imprisoned and beaten. The authorities use the tactic of intimidation, fear and physical threat. At least 6 people were killed. Dozens are missing. This is taking place in the middle of Europe. The current crisis ensued in the wake of the election of August 9. By the opinion of the majority of observers, the electoral process was deeply flawed. Some opponents of Mr. Lukashenko, including my own husband, were jailed on trumped-up charges. Others had to flee under the fear of prosecution. The election itself was marked with thousands of violations, while the most respected observers of the electoral process, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, were not invited to observe the election. The official results of the election were falsified and rejected by the Belarusian people and the majority of the international community. The European leaders jointly declared the official election results fraudulent. The parties of the European Parliament in a joint statement said that they do not recognize the results of the Belarusian election and do not recognize Mr. Lukashenko as the elected president of Belarus. Let me use the opportunity to express the gratitude of Belarusian people for the support to the European Parliament and all its parties. In the wake of the election, millions of Belarusians took to the streets all over the country in peaceful protest against Mr. Lukashenko. The demonstrations are unprecedented in size and scope in the history of Belarus. Despite the peaceful nature of the protests, the authorities attempted a violent crackdown on the people. This, however, hasn't deterred our people and only strengthened the resolve of the nation. Last Sunday saw the largest public demonstrations in the history of Belarus, where more than 200,000 people took to the streets of the capital, Minsk. Belarus has woken up. We are not the opposition anymore. We are the majority now. The peaceful revolution is taking place. The revolution in Belarus is not a geopolitical revolution. It is neither a pro-Russian nor anti-Russian revolution. It is neither an anti-European Union nor pro-European Union revolution. It is a democratic revolution. It is the striving of the nation to decide for itself. It is the striving of the people to freely and fairly elect its leaders and decide its destiny. The revolution in Belarus is not a violent revolution. It is a peaceful striving of the people for liberty and freedom, for self-determination and basic dignity. I call on all the countries of the world to respect the fundamental right of the nation for self-determination. I call on all the countries of the world to respect the sovereignty of Belarus. I call on all the countries of the world to respect the territorial integrity of Belarus. The demand of Belarusians is simple: a free and fair election. This is the demand of the protesters on the streets. This is the slogan of the people on strike in numerous factories across the country. This is the wish of the whole nation. Belarus is a part of Europe, culturally, historically, and geographically. We are committed to the norms of international law and want to take a rightful place among other nations in Europe. Europe's experience in guaranteeing rule of law, human rights, independent judiciary, and free media is of primary importance to the new, reborn Belarus. In the past 2 weeks, the Belarusians showed that they will not relent and they will not give up. The will of the people will not be broken. It is our aim to achieve the fair and free election peacefully by way of dialogue. Hereby, I declare our readiness for negotiations with the authorities. We are ready to nominate the negotiators. We are willing to consider the mediation of international organizations in order to facilitate the dialogue. In order to facilitate the transitional period, I have initiated a National Coordination Council comprised of all layers of Belarusian civic society and all sides of the political spectrum. Unfortunately, the authorities responded with threats and intimidation against the members of Council, including Nobel Prize winner Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya. The intimidation won't work. We will not relent. We demand to respect our basic rights. We demand all political prisoners freed. We demand to stop violence and intimidation by the authorities. Belarusian people deserve better. Europe deserves better. Thank you.
Ms. Tsikhanouskaya, on behalf of our committee, let me thank you for your message. This is a message which will reach an audience far beyond Belarus. We wish you all strength and persistence in the struggle for democracy and respect on human rights and freedoms in your country. Rest assured that we will continue to follow the developments closely and offer the support that your nation needs during this challenging time. Once again, thank you for taking your time and delivering this statement to the members of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Colleagues, I would now suggest that we continue with the discussion on the situation in Belarus. I have been informed that the groups will now have a second round of speakers. Once again, I will give the floor for the 7 political groups and the non-inscrit, and then we will have, if time allows, a third and fourth round, and then I will give the floor according to the D'Hondt system. So now I give the floor to the EPP speaker, Michael Gahler.
Tsikhanouskaya for her impressive statement. Let me express our admiration for your courage and your determination and for making so clear that you are peaceful, that you seek dialogue, and that your democratic revolution is not directed against anybody outside. But I think that everybody in the international community can wholeheartedly and should wholeheartedly support your way, especially in a time when members of your coordination council are sitting as we speak in court, Olga Kovalkova and Sergei Dilevsky, who are sitting there and being accused of whatever, who had not the chance to talk with their lawyers, who are by Skype from the prison taken to the court. So I think it is for us very important to name them and to make it very clear that we demand their immediate release. The government should seek dialogue and not arrest of those who are willing for dialogue. My question to Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya would be how she sees her role in this process and how she would be in a position to take it up with those who can take decisions, be it inside Belarus or also outside, be it in Russia or on the European side. Have you got contacts towards Russia to make them very clear? As you said, this is nothing anti-Russian, but that is something pro-Belarusian, and how you would be able through your channels to contact Moscow and tell them very clearly what your agenda is. And I think from our side, you can always expect the necessary support in the framework of the Eastern Partnership in order to be helpful once the newly elected president and democratic parliament are in charge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael Gahler. For the S&D group, I have on my list again Tonino Pizzula. Tonino?
Yes, thank you, David, and let me thank you, Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, for sharing with us your experience and thoughts on the situation in Belarus. I want to simply and sincerely express my greatest respect for the courage and determination that you and many other Belarusians have shown over the past months, weeks and days. I pay respect for all these people, no matter whether they are presidential candidates, campaign staff, supporters, voters protesting against the falsification of election results, citizens protesting against the repression, or simply men and women, young people and the elderly, city dwellers and village residents, metal workers and office people, denouncing the horrible violence towards protesters. Of course, we cannot recognize the results of the elections, which were neither free nor fair, did not allow for elections observation, and did not respect the international standards. We are appalled by the violence against peaceful protesters, arbitrary arrest of people and signs of torture against those detained. All must be released immediately, and all acts of violence and inhuman treatment must be investigated and prosecuted. I believe it's an undeniable sign of hope for Belarusian citizens that there has been vast support for presidential contender who did not neither represent the authoritarian system in place since 26 years, nor any particular opposition party. This underlines the power of the people's call for democratic change. I speak on behalf of my political group, Socialists and Democrats, when I say that we stand by the people of Belarus and wish to support their aspirations for democratic representations and political participation. As European Union, we must maintain a strong and principled position, implement a targeted sanction against all perpetrators of acts of violence and repression, and offer fast and effective support for Belarusian civil society, including a possible dialogue process with the authorities. Good luck.
Thank you, Tonino Pizzula. For the Renew Group, I give the floor to Petras Ostrevičius, who is connected, I understand, only per phone, so unfortunately he won't be able to be interpreted. Please.
Thank you, David. I hope you hear me. Do you?
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
Excellent. Chairman, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, indeed, thank you, Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, for your statement, a clear message on very right time. Dictator Lukashenko has lost any trust among people, as brutality, intimidation, disappearances, reports about rape of detainees, among them children, is really shocking. We do see revolt of dignity and rebirth of national identity of Belarus. I hope we all will learn to pronounce rightly the name of Belarus and Belarusians. They are a proud nation being located in a center of Europe. They are part of Europe. That's why I call on EU officials to abstain from compromised statements on Belarus. Some of them rejected Belarus as a European country. It's completely wrong. Neither comparing Belarus with Ukraine, which was invaded by Russia, and it can't be called as the second Ukraine. Colleagues, I highly commend statements made by our political groups in the European Parliament as well as EU Council. One thing I essentially missed in the EU Council report and conclusions. It's a call for new, free and fair elections. Listen to the call from Sviatlana. She is completely right. Not implementing this, we will come to kind of Venezuelan scenario of political developments. Indeed, sanctions must be imposed as well as extended not just to 30 or 40 officials. Medium level, those in charge of elections, so-called election commissions who signed falsified protocols must be included. We have to send a very clear message to Belarusians and as well to those people.
As Petra's now been kicked out, I just wanted to remind him that... Yeah, well, can you give him the floor, but he needs to come to an end now.
Yes, I am coming to the end. I am coming to the end with my question to Sviatlana, asking her, knowing that 53 million were additionally allocated, I don't believe, the structure is completely right. Sviatlana, would you express your opinion. What is most needed for the support of Belarusian people, activists, and those workers on the strike? Żyje Belarus.
Thank you, Petra Sostrevicius. Colleagues, I just wanted to inform you that Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya is still connected, but we have agreed that she will not react to the comments made. This was discussed beforehand. So she will note everything you're saying, but don't expect an immediate response at this meeting. Next on my list is for the ID group, Thierry Mariani, again.
Président, merci.
Chairman, thank you. Well, I appreciated what Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya said, and I think that what she said shows that this situation is very, very different from the one in Ukraine. She stated clearly that this wasn't pro-anti-Russian or pro- or anti-EU. I'm going to ask a question. I know she won't answer, but I thought I understood that there was a proposal from the current government to change the constitution and at least discuss organising subsequent elections. Is that a proposal that she would say is acceptable? And what's the situation with regard to discussions with the authorities? Because I understand a certain number of people have been appointed to hold discussions, but are there genuine contacts currently between the authorities in the country and the demonstrators? Thank you.
Thank you, Thierry Mariani. For the Greens EFA group, I now give the floor to Viola von Kamontabade, bitte.
Yes, thanks a lot to Sviatlana and, of course, to all the members of the peaceful demonstration while we were following the events in Belarus already for a long time, already in the pre-election period. We were all impressed by your engagement and by your commitment to work for the people in Belarus. While after the election, we have seen this massive human rights violation, which were mentioned by many of my colleagues now. And of course, we are shocked by the events of the last days, the arresting and the other, let's say, violations by the Lukashenko regime. While everyone is calling on non-interference of all the international partners, where I'm agreeing, of course, we shouldn't be naive that Russia is already in Belarus very active and controlling, as my Polish colleague has mentioned, the security forces, the special forces. The Kremlin has obviously sent the bodyguards who are now around Lukashenko. We have seen that the state TV, the media representatives are being sent from Moscow. And of course, we see the influence from the Kremlin in the military side as well. So on one hand, it's of course not a geopolitical game. On the other side, we shouldn't be naive. And I would like to ask you, Sviatlana, and maybe also the others in the Coordination Council, what you think about the piece of Mr. Arthur Schreibman, who has proposed to bring the church into the game as a mediator, as a moderator, instead of the international community, rather having, let's say, another role, a moderating role in Belarus. And I think this could be maybe a good time to ask the different 5 churches to come into this game. I wish you all the best. And of course, we surely stand behind you, and we surely stand behind all the peaceful demonstrators in Belarus during or for the next weeks and months coming up.
Thank you, dear colleague. Next for the ECR group, Anna Fatiga, for 2 minutes.
Mrs. Fatiga, could you please press the speak button?
Thank you, Chair. Madam, welcome to the European Parliament. We stand by the people of Belarus peacefully demonstrating for their rights, for democracy. Like many members of the European Parliament, I do not recognize Alexander Lukashenko as legitimate president of Belarus. I'm convinced elections have been falsified, and therefore we appeal for immediate discussions to pursue democratic, free elections in Belarus and having results that express the will of the people of Belarus. We also stress the need of immediate release of political prisoners, as well as stopping all cases of violent behavior against society of Belarus. The situation is extremely dire, with victims, torture, and enormous waves of violence against very peaceful society. I admire women of Belarus protesting in the spirit of Kastus Kalinowski. I think it is this important spirit there. I agree with the words of my colleague that there is already creeping intervention in Ukraine. Lukashenko turned to the Kremlin for assistance and received this assistance, although it is kind of hidden one with hybrid taste to this. There is security services support, as well as propaganda or high-ranking propaganda teams present there. And when we speak about security, it's the close surrounding echelons of security services around Lukashenko himself. Lukashenko should be ousted.
Thank you.
Dear Anna, may I remind you one time?
I'm very sorry, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And next is for the GUI NGL group, Manu Pineda, again for 2 minutes.
Could you please press the speak button, sir?
Ahora. Gracias de nuevo, presidente.
Well, thank you again, Chairman. Well, Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya got 10% during the last election. She's been invited here to the European Parliament, but she's here accusing the Belarus government for all sorts of things, but we don't have any evidence. I mean, we should have perhaps invited a government spokesperson as well, so that we could have heard from them too. I hear people saying they're convinced that the results of the elections have been falsified, that this isn't a political game. Well, what is going on then? I mean, the point here is to try and bring NATO tanks and bombs to the Russian border. And if there is interference from Russia, well, it's legitimate because it's been requested by the government of Belarus, and then our intervention isn't legitimate because it hasn't been requested. Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya, you know the pressure that the European Union can bring to bear. We've seen it in Venezuela. Are you prepared to ensure that sanctions take place against your people because they didn't vote for you as president? Are you looking for a bloodbath, as took place in Ukraine? Are you prepared for the people of Belarus to pay with pain, hunger and suffering the fact that they didn't elect you as president? Because that's what this is all about. We have to respect the sovereign right of the people of Belarus to decide who's going to govern them. Yes, dialogue. The European Union needs to facilitate dialogue. That's what we should be doing. Thank you.
The next speaker for the non-inscrit is our colleague Fabio Castaldo for 2 minutes, who's with us here in Brussels.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. Colleagues, I'd like to thank Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya for being here with us today. The fact that she has left her country and is speaking in our committee about the dramatic social situation in Belarus really is very eloquent. The repression of human rights is clear. I mean, this took place prior to the election, clearly, and then has taken place to try and suppress the demonstrations that have taken place subsequent to the shameful results. I would like to express my condolences to the victims and my solidarity with the people of Belarus. I was shocked by cases of violence and torture carried out by the authorities on peaceful demonstrators. Yesterday, the authorities arrested various protesters, including Sergei Dilevsky and Olga Kovalkova, so things don't seem to have finished yet. Mr. Dilevsky expressed himself firmly denouncing the violence of the authorities. We shouldn't be silent given this terrible repression, so I would therefore demand the release of all political prisoners in Belarus, and we need a robust diplomatic response which will ensure sincere, genuine and frank dialogue between the forces of the government and the forces of the opposition. And this dialogue should then lead to the reforms that the people of Belarus are asking for, i.e. reform of the constitution and the elimination of the suppressive legislation that is currently in force. And then we need new elections which are transparent in the presence of international observers. I would also like to the echo of Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya when she calls for full respect of Belarus, the sovereignty of the Republic of Belarus, and also the involvement of international organisations. It's not the first time that the people of Belarus have demonstrated against Mr. Lukashenko, but if the government doesn't take up the requests made for change by its people, it may be the last time they take to the streets. It's time for Belarus to turn the page. Thank you.
Thank you. We now come to our third round, and I will give the floor to colleagues following the D'Hondt rule. First is Andreas Kubilius, the President of the Euronest Assembly, and then I will give the floor to Mr. Biedron, who chairs the Belarus delegation. So, Andreas Kubilius, for 1.5 minutes, and please stick to your time.
Well, thanks a lot, Mr. Chairman. Well, first of all, I would like to thank Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya for a really very, very strong statement. I appreciate very much. I will not repeat what everybody knows and understands. Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya won elections on 9 of August, and Lukashenko lost those elections. Now the people of Belarus are defending their victory on the streets against the violence of the regime. And really what Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya stressed, this is a democratic revolution, not a geopolitical revolution. But we need to see a very clear difference. We in the European Union, and I hope that in the whole democratic community of the world, we're standing together with the people of Belarus. Unfortunately, for the time being, we can see that Kremlin is standing together with Lukashenko regime. I'm sure that at the end, democracy will prevail in Belarus, but we need to see what still is needed to be done. Of course, there is a need of new and transparent and democratic elections. despite the fact that Lukashenko is afraid of them, because he understands very well that he will lose those elections. But OSCE role can be very important. Of course, there is a need of justice, and I would call for international investigation of the crimes of Oman, and that is where the European Parliament can play an important role. And the last point, I would call also for the Commission to start to prepare a big package of assistance to democratic Belarusian government, new government, and to the economy, which will face big troubles in the near future. And 50 million will not be enough. We need to talk about 3 or 4 billion euros, and that is what the EU needs to be ready to give for new democratic Belarus.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Biedron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would like to congratulate Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya for her result and underline the role of women in this election and transition. It's spectacular. We should remember, and I want to really make it clear, and Ms. Tsikhanouskaya has underlined that too, that Belarus is part of Europe. Is our close neighbor to European Union, and we should remember about that. And secondly, our policy called critical engagement is not working anymore. We need to redefine our strategy, horizontal strategy towards Belarus. And we have a lot of words, but having a lot of words, we need more actions too. And we see it clearly. We, I as a chair of delegation, and Petras Austrevicius as a standing rapporteur, we issued so far 6 statements on the situation in Belarus. And nothing is working. We need new mechanisms. But what we need now, and I fully agree, is to impose sanctions which will work. We also need to press on new free elections in Belarus, as Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya has underlined. We also should redirect EU financial support from benefiting the regime, and we have a lot of examples of that, to the benefit of civil society. And 2 other things. We should recognize the Transition Coordination Council. We should start working with them immediately. And I have a little suggestion to our committee. We should organize, as soon as possible, the delegation to Vilnius to have a dialogue with the Transition Committee. This delegation should be composed of our members, and we should not repeat the mistake which we made already with the sanctions concerning coronavirus, with not letting our members to Belarus because European Parliament has imposed its own sanctions for our travels outside EU. Thank you very much. Żyje Belarus.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Biedron, and I understand that you have already written to President Sassoli. This is up to the President and the Presidency of the Parliament to decide. Next is for the Renew Group, for 1.5 minutes, Monsieur Guetta.
Oui, merci. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Il y a 3...
Thank you, Chairman. Well, there are 3 lessons to be drawn from what's going on in Belarus. The first is that the ideals of freedom and democracy know no borders. People have taken to the streets and they want change. The second lesson is that the Russian regime, this is about Russia, has its limits. He's concerned about doing what he did in the Ukraine because that creates Russophobia. And the third lesson is that we need to ensure that this country doesn't become the subject of great power rivalry. We can only be useful if we call for dialogue. We need to call for the freeing of political prisoners and for Russia to have a role here, but we need to ensure that we defend the interests of Belarus as well.
Merci, Benageta. Next is Miriam Lexman for 1.5 minutes.
Mrs. Lexman, could you please press the speak button? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I want to pay tribute to the brave people of Belarus, including many of my friends who continue to fight from the prisons or from the streets for a free and democratic Belarus. Dear colleagues, Ms. Tsikhanouskaya, I believe that there are 4 important steps we must take. First, we have to continue strongly insist and press for the immediate release of all political prisoners, all those detained during the protests as well as in the pre-election period. The release of all political prisoners and detainees must be #1 precondition for any dialogue with the regime. Secondly, we must ensure targeted sanctions against all individuals, groups and entities responsible for the repressions. However, these sanctions must also target those individuals and entities who provide the regime with the financial resources to pay for the current repressions. This includes the need to have the EU Magnitsky Act in place as soon as possible. Thirdly, Mr. Kubilius recently wrote, we must maintain a full record of all atrocities committed by the regime against the people so that these can be used to hold the regime accountable through legal means. My last point, as Ms. Kalniate pointed out, we have to ensure that no EU financial aid will end in the hands of the regime or can be used for gaining its strength. I implore European leaders to stand with the people of Belarus in their desire for a free, democratic country and ensure that the regime is held accountable and brought to justice. Živie Belarus.
Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you, Miriam.
And now I give the floor to Kati Piri from the S&G Group.
Thank you very much, Chair. And in case Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya is still online, let me also on my behalf wish her courage, and we obviously stand with the people of Belarus. I don't know, Chair, if Helga Schmidt is still on the line. In case not, I would request you if you could please still transfer some questions to her. My questions would be, on the 9th of August, also the EU Council has declared that the elections were not free and fair. Still, this was missing from the statement of the EU leaders. How could this sentence be missing, that we ask for new and free elections in Belarus? The other thing that was reported in the media is that when it comes to the targeted sanctions, Lukashenko himself might not be on the targeted sanctions list. I would like to have a confirmation from the EAS that Mr. Lukashenko will be, obviously, for obvious reason, one of the people who will be facing targeted sanctions. Another question to the EAS would be, who are your interlocutors now in Belarus? Is this now the coordination council set up by a presidential candidate Tsikhanouskaya? I also heard Helga Schmidt saying high time to rethink the strategy of critical engagement. Does this also include the option, the willingness to expel Belarus and Azerbaijan, the 2 dictatorships, in case nothing changes in Belarus, from the Eastern Partnership? And finally, when it comes to the sanctions, I would also be interested if the EU is trying to coordinate this together with the UK, with the US, with Canada, together to come up with a joint targeted sanctions list. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kati Piri. The next slot would go to the ID group, but I haven't any request for additional speaking time. So we move on to number 7 on the Dahont list. That is Markéta Gregorova from the Greens.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Ms. Tsikhanouskaya and dear colleagues. Thank you for your words. Strength and bravery you and your fellow Belarusian citizens are constantly proving. We all know the situation further deteriorates. While Lukashenko flexes his power being armed himself, yesterday members of the Coordination Council have been arrested, and too many innocents have been beaten, murdered, and taken away from their families. The struggle is not over. The toughest days may be ahead of us, and not only because of the actions of Lukashenko himself, but also because of Kremlin's promises of solving the situation. I very welcome these sanctions settled by our governments, yet this is not enough. The EU must prepare itself to counter even more violent reactions by Lukashenko and possible hostile moves by the Kremlin that might further endanger the safety and freedom of Belarusian citizens. Belarusian people deserve free, democratic elections, not tanks nor a puppet government, both of which can Kremlin provide. Thank you, and I wish you strength for what is yet to come. We stand behind you. Živě Belarus.
Thank you. Now we come to Radosław Sikorski for the EPP Group. 1.5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chairman, Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya, I just want to express how impressed and humbled I feel by the extraordinary bravery of the people of Belarus and of yourself. You've made a moderate and dignified statement, and I also condemn those who have blackmailed you into leaving your country. You and Helga Schmidt are absolutely right. This is not about the EU. This is not about NATO. This is an absurd proposition. This is about a stolen election. It's an internal Belarusian affair in which we, of course, sympathize with the Democrats, but we don't interfere. We were surprised by what happened. We should not interfere, and others shouldn't interfere. I second what Jacek Saryusz-Wolski said, that we already have elements of a hybrid intervention, and we should name and shame it. Hopefully, there will be mediation. It can only succeed if the authorities want it. But in the meantime, we should aim forward, Mr. Butikofer was suggesting, an Armenian-type solution with a new election under the supervision of the OSCE. Lastly, I'd like to tell the High Rep that this is a crisis on Europe's very border, and our unity, but also your effectiveness, will be tested by what we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sikorski. And now I give the floor for the ECR Group to our Vice Chair of the Committee, Witold Waszczykowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Tsikhanouskaya, for being with us. Let me present briefly information to my colleagues about the Polish program of support for the Belarusian. The program is called Solidarity with Belarus. It's based on 3 pillars. Security, openness, and solidarity. And because I hope that the message will go through the media to Belarus, so let me express further myself in Polish. Polska jest kolebką.
Poland is actually the birthplace of solidarity, and because of that we can't stand and do nothing looking at what's happening in Belarus. As Lech Kaczyński, former Polish president, once said, the role of Poland would be to support countries that are left to their own devices by others. We have a program, Solidarity with Belarus, which was presented by our Prime Minister a few days ago. 5 points. First of all, support for those who have been detained, and also study bursaries for students, for scientists that could be sent to universities, and facilitations when it comes to Belarusians entering Poland, when it comes to visa charges or even document requirements. And 4th point would be support for independent media, and the 5th, support for NGOs. What we do is not perceived as interference with internal matters of our neighbour. It's a helping hand extended to Belarus. Long live Belarus, and all the best to Madam Tsikhanouskaya and I admire you for your courage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Waszkowski. Now, the next speaker on my list is Sven Mikser for the S&D.
Thank you, Chair, and I would like to add my voice to all those who have thanked Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya for a very comprehensive and very clear statement. And I would also like to add my voice to those who praised the courage and determination of the Belarusian people. It has been extremely impressive the way the people have protested the dictatorship in a peaceful and dignified manner. I would like to say that it is quite very obvious to everyone that President Lukashenko, the former President Lukashenko, has exhausted whatever remnants of popular legitimacy he might have claimed to have had prior to this election. And now it's a clear expression of the Belarusian people that want to get rid of the dictatorship. But I must also caution ourselves that we have seen on many previous occasions that the crumbling of a dictatorship or a totalitarian regime does not necessarily automatically result in the creation of a stable democracy. Following the removal of the dictator, normally a period of confusion follows, during which very often the remnants of the old regime are best placed and best resourced and organized and motivated to grab the power. So I think that we must think and plan very carefully as the European Union as to how we can best support the Belarusian people in their legitimate aspirations without ever questioning their sovereign right to choose the best path for their people and for the country. And I also want to say that I agree with all those who have said previously that we must not be naive about the intentions of the Kremlin, of the Russian regime.
Thank you, Sven Mikser. I've been informed that Urmas Pait, who should be the next speaker, is apparently not connected. So I will move on to the next on the list, and that is Isabel Wieseler Lima. Bitte, Isabel.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Je voudrais,
Now, to say things diplomatically, I think we could say there's some significant doubt regarding the reliability of the results claimed by Alexander Lukashenko. But if you speak clearly, then you can say that he is lying about the elections he has lost. And I think it's quite right that the EU should refuse to recognise the outcome of these elections and that we should call for fresh elections to be held. And I think the situation degenerating into something resembling Venezuela would be disastrous. Now, I respect and admire everyone who has refused to be intimidated in the face of repression, imprisonments, torture and violent acts. I don't know how we would react when faced with these kinds of events, so I pay tribute to your courage. I'd like to repeat something that many have already said, but I don't think we can say it often enough. This is not a geopolitical revolution, this is a democratic revolution. And I'd like to stress that it's essential that we insist on non-interventionism, which has been echoed and repeatedly stressed by Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya as well. Let's not allow the momentum to fizzle out and for things to be forgotten. There's always room for surprises and for opportunities. Let's not forget this. Thank you.
Next is Mick Wallace for the GUI Group.
Thanks, President. There seems to be broad agreement that the people of Belarus should be the ones to decide their future. But I suppose where we differ is to how that happens. Madam Schmidt pointed out that there was no EU flags at the demonstrations. And likewise, Tsikhanouskaya pointed out that it wasn't pro-Russian and it wasn't pro-EU or anti-either. But I'd like to ask her if there's any truth in the rumour that she's actually had a meeting with the US Deputy Secretary of State with a view to so-called strengthening democracy, because I'd like her to confirm or deny, as it would be worrying if she had. Now, given what's gone on, we should have learned from our mistakes, and what went on in Venezuela hasn't turned out very well, and recognising the unelected Guaido wasn't a great idea, and the Western interference in the Ukraine has led to more problems than solved them. I think it's absolutely essential that there is strong dialogue with Russia. This was a buffer between Russia and Europe, and don't forget that Napoleon and Hitler came through Belarus on their way to Russia. I would support Madam Schmidt's call for a release of all political prisoners. I don't think there should be political prisoners anywhere. But if we're going to have credibility on the matter, we should also call for the release of political prisoners in the Catalan. And Julian Assange is a political prisoner in London, which we should also be addressing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mick Wallace. Colleagues, just to give you an update, we have 20 minutes left for our session. I would suggest that I now give the floor to the 5 remaining colleagues still on the list. Mr. Rangel, Mr. Olekas, Mr. Stefanuta, Mr. Usakovs and Mr. Saryusz-Wolski. And then we will sum up the debate by statements from Mr. Lawrence Meredith from DG NEAR and Richard Tibbles from the European External Action Service. And we will have to close this meeting at 1 o'clock. If that's okay for you, then the next speaker is now Mr. Rangel. Paolo.
Thank you, Chair. Naturally, first, I would like to congratulate Madam Tsikhanouskaya because her courage as a candidate, and even today her statement, as I would say, a stateswoman that is prepared to lead a transition, are an example of democracy, of tolerance, of openness to create a democratic regime in Belarus and to create the best relations with the European Union, but also with Russia. And this is a very, very important statement that we should have as a reference for our policies. Second, I would like to also apply to the release of all political prisoners that are indeed political prisoners and not, as our previous speaker has tried to create comparisons with situations that have anything to do with the situation in Minsk and in Belarus. Finally, I'd like to underline that this movement, this revolution, is a peaceful one, a non-violent one. And then we, as European Union, should give all the support to the claims of the people, respecting the sovereignty and the freedom of decision of the Belarusian people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paolo Rangel. Next is Iosas Olekas. Is Mr. Olekas connected? Okay. Okay, we'll move on to the next speaker, sitting in the room, Nikos Stefanuta.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender. Dear colleagues, Sviatlana is right. This is not a battle of world powers. Most people outside of Belarus noticed there were elections in this country not earlier than July, let's be honest. Many did not know Sviatlana even ran until a few days before August, for obvious reasons, because this was not her plan. She was forced to run. In this parliament with Petras, with Robert, We read the list of 188 political prisoners here in this House in June. Our message is, we are here for you, for the people, and for the principles. We are here for your people and not for you personally. And I think Sviatlana gives us the same message, that we shouldn't be there for her personally, we should be there for the Belarusian people, because this is not a competition of the wills and of the muscles, but one for the democratic will of the Belarusian people. For a president who got presumably 80% of the vote, Lukashenko looks terribly shaky. No place where he is not booed in his own country. No leaders other than other dictators recognizing the result of the election. Ladies and gentlemen, a leader elected through theft is a leader who isolates his own country. I support Sviatlana, but I support more the legitimacy of the democratic elections, and this can only be done through a repeat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nikos Stefanuta. Second try to connect Juozas Olekas.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I think now it's working. Thank you, first of all, Chairman, and thank you.
We hear you, but we don't see you. We see a nice piece of wood and furniture. Perhaps.
Okay, I will try to. Just a moment, I will check.
Could you please press on the front camera, sir? Thank you.
I did.
No, we were happy to have you connected.
Okay, thank you. Can I continue?
Yeah, continue. We'll do it without translation.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, for your strong statement. Unfortunately, dictator Lukashenko not only openly falsified the election result, but he also using state powers against the citizens in Belarus. We must act immediately. The EU should be the role model helping Belarus to get out of this crisis strong and more democratic. Without our help, Belarus could be more and more politically financially influenced by the state players, Russia or China. We must immediately condemn any use of violence against peaceful citizens, and we should recognize the consultative council, and also we should strongly support the new free and fair election, as Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya mentioned. I think this is very important, that we must impose the sanction on those who oppose these priorities and ensure that we provide all necessary assistance to the citizens in Belarus. Живи Belarus. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to our colleague, Mr. Usakovs.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to be very short and clear. We've got a nation in the very middle of Europe. European nation fighting for basic rights and basic things. Don't beat us, don't beat our children, don't put us to jail, and allow us to vote. And they are standing against a president non-elect, flying over the city of Minsk with a loaded AK in his hand. We've got a Minister of Defense saying that there are 18 Polish jet fighters being ready to attack Belarus to overthrow president. If European Union fails now, it will be the most dramatic failure of Europe, not as an institution, it will be a dramatic failure of every single value we trust. So we have to be concerned about everything, about stability, about not having additional round of tensions with Russia, but we have to keep in mind, this time we are really dealing with the values of democracy and the future of our continent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Rodriguez Ramos.
Gracias, Presidente. Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. First of all, allow me to recognize the courage of the people of Belarus, their determination, their courage in seeking an end to 26 years of dictatorship. The last elections haven't been held in a democratic way, they haven't been free or fair, they haven't met the OSCE conditions and criteria that the country should adhere to in order for elections to be deemed free and fair. The people in the country had been suffering under the dictatorship for 26 years now. So the clear message from the European Commission and the High Representative is one that we should all send out. That is to say, we do not recognise President Lukashenko and his re-election. We call upon him to immediately cease violent repression and arbitrary detention of protesters and immediate release of all protesters who've been jailed in the recent protests. We call on the regime to organise free and fair elections and for violence to cease. Now, in order for this to be possible and for civil rights to be restored, in addition to new elections, more needs to happen. There needs to be an end to impunity of those who've been violating the rights. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, we need to have a cut here because I want to give the floor now to Lawrence Meredith, the Director for Neighbourhood East in the DG NEA, and then Richard Tibbles from the External Action Service. And we have to close our meeting in exactly 10 minutes' time. So, Lawrence Meredith for 5 minutes. Perhaps you could also answer a few questions of colleagues which were raised. So, no connection possible. We'll continue to try. Then I will now give the floor to Richard Tibbles, External Action Service. They're at the same. Well, perhaps for the minutes of this meeting, I have once before said that I prefer that representatives of the Commission and the External Action Service come to the committee meetings in person. I don't think that the distance between buildings in Brussels is that big that this shouldn't be possible. And I would like to really insist that we, from now on, exactly do this. Perhaps representatives from the External Action Service and the DG NEA who are present can inform their bosses about this. I won't accept this any longer because we always have these difficulties, and I think it's absolutely legitimate that colleagues can, if possible, talk to representatives in person.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear us?
Well, I can hear you. Who am I talking to? Richard Tibbles or Lawrence Meredith? I can't see you.
I apologise. We will make sure this doesn't happen again. You are speaking to Richard Tibbles. I'm in the same room as Lawrence Meredith. So with your permission, Lawrence could say a very few words and then I would follow up.
Okay. Happy to give you a floor next time here in person in the room. That would be even better. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I apologise. We were both with Helga earlier. That's what made this arrangement. But delighted to join you in person next time. Just to reaffirm, very important that we have the opportunity to join this crucial debate. We fully stand by the Belarusian people, condemn the violence, and on our side of the European Commission, I just want to be absolutely clear, as the President von der Leyen was last week and Helga Schmidt was earlier this morning, that all European Union support is for the benefit of the Belarusian people. We'll support victims with medical and legal aid, support civil society and independent media, and will mitigate the impact of COVID, which has been devastating, in particular in the light of the response in this country. That's it from me, Chairman. Thank you very much, and apologies for the inconveniences.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I could just follow up. There were references to sanctions. The discussions on sanctions will now continue at the Gimnick meeting of foreign ministers on Thursday. It would be wrong of me to go into any names at this juncture. As regards who we are speaking to now, we are speaking to all actors in Belarus. You will have heard Helga Schmidt say that the High Representative has spoken to the Belarusian foreign minister. We're in regular contact with the opposition and civil society as well. Belarus, within the Eastern Partnership, is obviously going to be part of our broader review of EU-Belarus relations, which we will conduct in due course. And finally, obviously, we're talking to all key like-minded partners on dealing with this crisis as we move ahead. Thank you very much, and from my side as well, apologies for the technical problems.
Okay, thank you for these brief statements. I guess that we can now sum up today's debate. I would like to thank all of you for your active participation. I have seen that under any other business, Mr. Mariani will take the floor in just a second. Let me just sum up the last nearly 2 hours. It's clear that the European Parliament overwhelmingly supports the right of the people of Belarus to participate in free and fair elections and to exercise their rights and freedoms. Now more than ever, Belarusians deserve our solidarity and support. The European Union needs to do all in its power to strengthen the cause of freedom and democracy in this country. And as we have heard, this includes effective sanctions against perpetrators of violations of human rights and electoral fraud, and pressure to release all political prisoners and those arbitrarily detained. The violence against the people must end. The only viable solution for a stable future of a sovereign Belarus is a dialogue involving all domestic and international stakeholders, leading to a peaceful solution. Colleagues, we will have the opportunity to express our position in the report of Petras Ostrevichus on our recommendation to the Council, the Commission and the Vice President of the Commission High Representative on relations with Belarus, which we will vote presumably on the 21st of September. Now I would like to give the floor under any other business to 2 colleagues. The first was Jacek Saryusz-Wolski. Please.
This is just a formal remark. I would call on colleagues to pronounce the name of Tsikhanouskaya Sviatlana in the Belarusian language, not Russian. And this is addressed to vous, Monsieur Mariani, par exemple. She is not Tsikhanouskaya, and then do it out of respect for the identity of Belarus and not to show that we consider Belarus as a Russian sphere of influence. It's Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, not Tsikhanouskaya. Tsikhanouskaya is Russian and still being used by some of us, not only, but it's taken by Belarusians badly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saryusz-Wolski, for this advice. I still need to improve my Belarusian. It's Tikhanovska. You say chi or not?
They say Tsikhanouskaya.
Tsikhanouskaya.
For non-Slavic speakers, it is written TH, but it should be pronounced Tsikhanouskaya.
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 Okay. Okay, thank you. Thierry Mariani.
Je remercie mon collègue pour ce cours de formation.
Thank you very much indeed for this language class, and I'll certainly take that on board. I'd like to very briefly mention a different country, Lebanon. We've heard of dramatic events in Beirut. We've seen the situation, people suffering from COVID, and As you will know, there's been changes to the government there. So I think we ought to have a meeting on that on the 27th of November last year. In the plenary session, I drew everyone's attention to the situation in the country, and I'd taken the example of subsidies, EU subsidies that never reached the intended beneficiaries in Tripoli when it comes to waste treatment facilities. So now I'd like to draw everyone's attention to the situation in the country, and I'd like to look at whether subsidies really are reaching those who need it. And I'd asked this question of Mrs. Mogherini a long time ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Thierry Mariani. If I remember correctly, for the AFET meeting beginning of September, is it the 1st of September, Lebanon is already on the agenda. So we will cover your request and discuss, of course, the situation in another important country in our immediate neighborhood. Let me once again ask you, are there any other requests under any other business? That is not the case. Then I can close on time and just inform you that our next meetings will be on the 1st of September from 9 to 11, from 2:30 to 4:45, and from 4:45 to 7:15. And then we will meet again on the 10th of September from 9 till 11 and from 4:45 till 7:15. Both meetings will take place in Brussels. Thank you, colleagues, for your participation, and I now close the meeting, and I also say bye-bye to all those people following us on the web stream. The meeting is closed.